Indian tells you, it's time now for another true story of the West. And their friend is the man who knows the real West and its exciting history. Yes, it's time once again for Tim McCoy.
So this is Deadwood. Deadwood and the Black Hills. You know, the very mention of the word Deadwood conjures up a picture of the Deadwood stage being attacked by Indians. Deadwood Dick, you know, holding up people, bad men of the Old West. The Black Hills, Pasapa, the great medicine Black Hills of the Sioux Nation. And here we are. Isn't it strange when you go back and think about these places and the things that happened in these places? When Deadwood Gulch was filled with Indians, if they dare go in there. And then there was the gold strike and people poured in there from all over. First thing you know, saloons like this were built up along the gulch, and then it turned out to be a city. Big town. And into it poured all the riffraff and all the decent people that made up all of our old boom towns in the West. Well, you had people, when I was mentioning about Deadwood Dick, for instance, look at this old rascal here. Now take that old fellow, for instance. It shows you what happens in some of these towns. You know, people try to perpetuate the romance and the history of our old West. And how could you do it better than Deadwood Dick? That's, of course, the funny part of it is, you know, there wasn't any such fellow. There never was a fellow called Deadwood Dick. Back in the old days when these dime novels were being written, you know, Deadwood Dick was just the brainchild of a writer back east, back in New York, a fellow who'd never been out west. So he started writing those fantastic tales about Deadwood Dick, the two-gun bandit of the West. Well, they picked it up, people believed it, they talked about Deadwood Dick, and then it was forgotten. Well, a few years back, people of Deadwood wanted to have a big celebration. They called it Deadwood Days, Frontier Days, Historical Days, whatever they wanted to call it. But they decided to have a great parade, historical pageant, showing sort of the progress of Pasapa, the Black Hills. Then somebody said, when they thought about the different characters, well, we ought to have somebody representing Calamity Jane, and Wild Bill, and General Custer. And then someone said, but what about Deadwood Dick? What would you do about Deadwood Dick? So they got an old-timer, fellow with a long handlebar mustache, and they dressed him all up, put him in the parade. He was to represent Deadwood Dick. They put buckskins on him, and he was just the sort of guy to do it. Long mustache, as I say, and he was just about the right age. So he was Deadwood Dick in the parade. Well, next day, he took off his buckskins and went back to his job in the livery barn, and everything was all right, and he was forgotten for another year. Parade came off next year, and they said, well, say, do you remember we had Deadwood Dick in the parade? Let's get the old boy out again. So they did this for about 3 years. He would come out for one day and be Deadwood Dick, and the next day he went back, as I said, to the livery barn or whatever his job happened to be at the moment. He was just an old roustabout around there. Well, then President Coolidge was going to take a vacation. He was going out west somewhere, and they said, we've got it. Let's send an invitation back to him by Deadwood Dick to come out and spend his summer in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Well, you always remember the pictures of Coolidge with the chaps and the Stetson hat on his head? They were rather funny, but Cal fell for it and came right out. Well, what they did with this old boy then, here's the costume they put on him. They fixed him all out in a buckskin shirt, beaded gauntlets and a big sash on his waist and a Stetson hat, said, you take this invitation back to Mr. Coolidge. So he went back, saw the president, delivered the invitation, and one look at him, he looked like all the old Western outlaws put together. Deadwood Dick was inviting the president personally. Well, as you know, Coolidge accepted the invitation, and he came on out. Well, That would have been all right, but someone in one of the travel agencies got an idea one day, and they said, I think it'd be a good idea to send this Deadwood Dick back to Chicago. We're having a big travel exposition back there, and send him back representing the Black Hills. So they dressed him up in that outfit again and sent him back, and they had pamphlets of Deadwood Dick, the Black Hills. The old boy was standing there, and inside they had a mock-up, you know, one of these dime novel ideas of what Deadwood Dick's life had been, where he was born, how many bar he'd killed, he'd fit Indians for years and years, so he had that in there. Well, one of the fellows from Deadwood came along. By this time, the old fellow's beginning to believe it. And this fellow up in the Dakotas came down and said, pardon me, sir, but are you Deadwood Dick? Said, yes, I am. He said, how long have you been in Deadwood? I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, I was just wondering how long you've been in Deadwood. Just look right there in that pamphlet. That just cost 10 cents. 10 cents for the pamphlet. Buy the pamphlet. You get my picture. Tells you all about it. All the fool questions that you're asking. Just buy the pamphlet. 10 cents, please. And that old guy believed it. And from that day till the day he died, he became Deadwood Dick, and he never took off those clothes. Well, now those are just some of the characters that you found around in this country at that time. Of course, there were some real ones, too. And the people began pouring into this Deadwood Gulch from all over. You know, behind all the gold strikes and on the fringe of them would come a certain element of people, gamblers, bartenders, saloon keepers, because when men ever dug for precious metal, there were always men coming around who wanted to take it away from them. So on the heels of this great wave coming up into the Deadwood came Wild Bill Hickok. Gone from the days of Marshal of Abilene, Wichita, Ellsworth. He'd been out on the road with Buffalo Bill Show. Quite a character, that Hickok, you know. He came up here to see what was going on. He liked to follow on the first wave, wherever it came in. I'll never forget a description a Texas cattleman made of him. He said, the first time I ever saw this Wild Bill, he stepped out of a saloon. He was the town marshal. And he looked the town over, up and down the street. His head sort of swung from one side to the other. He was just like a buffalo bull on the prod. Didn't want trouble, but if anybody had anything, they could just bring it to him. And I made up my mind right then that I wanted nothing to do and no part of Wild Bill. So in came Wild Bill. Colorado Charlie Utter was with him. Calamity Jane was there. Calamity. Good old Calamity Jane. You know, I have to laugh sometimes when I see the way she's portrayed as a perfectly beautiful gal. Blonde curls. Well, Calamity, you know, I saw Calamity Jane once. Must have been just about the year before she died, I imagine. She wa'n't no beauty. She had a broken nose, looked as though somebody had socked her with a bottle at some time or other. And she was a rough, tough old girl. And when they talk about her being the sweetheart of Wild Bill, don't believe it. Wild Bill, you know, was a very handsome and very fastidious fellow. Calam was an old gal that went about in men's clothes most of the time and would join a freight outfit that was going to the Black Hills, or a bunch of teamsters, crack a whip along with the rest of the teamsters in a quartermaster train anywhere. That wasn't Wild Bill's type at all. He was very fastidious. Any women who were around there, if there were any women that were beautiful, they would have been delighted to have Wild Bill take his hat off and acknowledge them. So all this thing about Calamity Jane and Wild Bill, she went around with them when they first came into Deadwood, but they just took her along for laughs from one bar to the other. That's about all it amounted to. But aside from that, don't think anything about that Calamity Wild Bill business. Because right in here, you know, that Wild Bill was killed. Right in this very saloon. Bill was a man that had protected himself for years, and he was never known to sit with his back to a door or window. But right here in this particular spot, Number 10 was the name this saloon had in those days. There was a chair here by the door. Bill, when he came in, would generally sit over there, back toward the bar, toward the wall there. This particular day he came in, they thought they'd job him, and a friend of his took that chair, and Bill said, you mind if I sit there? Oh, said Bill, sit over there. This chair with the door's all right. Bill said, if you don't mind, would you move over and let me sit down there? I prefer that chair. Oh, he said, it'll spoil my luck. Bill, I can't do that. Go on, he said, nobody's going to shoot you in the back. Go over there and sit in the chair. Don't be superstitious, Bill. And very much against his will, quite reluctantly, Wild Bill pulled up the chair with his back to this door. First time it had ever happened. Bill, of course, a man who'd made his way through life by his guns. Well, take this pair of guns here they've got. This pair of cap and ball guns. Cap and ball pistols. That's what Wild Bill made his reputation with. Down at Ellsworth in the early days. And then came the Colonel Colts, the peacemakers. That's what he maintained the reputation with. But strangely enough, the gun he had in his hand when he was killed wasn't as spectacular as any of those. It was the latest model Smith & Wesson that tipped up, you see, and the cylinder came out. You loaded the cylinder, put it back in, and the gun was ready to fire all over again. And it was a handy little gun because you could carry it, you see, without having to put on a belt and holster. And he had that gun on that particular day. Now, the cards that were used, here's your original deck. That's supposed to be the deck that was used right on this table. You notice the difference between them and the cards that they use now? They've got no markings on the edges like these cards have today. They're a little bit different. But that's the deck. They were sitting right here when Jack McCall came in. Jack McCall was just a kind of a town bum. He didn't amount to anything. If Wild Bill had been killed by an upstanding man in a good gunfight, wouldn't have meant half as much as it did by having this roustabout walk in, stand at the bar, come over, look at the game of cards, walk around until he was almost directly behind Bill. Stood over here for a while watching what was going on. Cards were dealt. Bill got his hand. The rest of the men got their hands. Then this fellow McCall wandered slowly around behind Bill, right where he could get out the back door, and quick as a flash, he pulled this pistol, put it at the back of Bill's head, and pulled the trigger. And Wild Bill, with his gun in his hand, fell forward. He got that gun out before he thought he was dead even. Here he was with his cards in his hand, but that pistol was in his hand, and there he was. And when they turned him over, he had two pair in his hand. Two pair that have become known for years and years. And there they are. Aces and eights.
Join us again for another true story of the West as told by Tim